Welcome to FIFA 17 Player Skills Analysis. My name is Rafal and I'm representing Group 3. The dataset used in this analysis comes from sofifa.com, which was scraped and made publicly available by a Kaggle member. The contents are values used in the actual FIFA 17 game, which was released in September of 2016. It contains statistics and metadata of almost 17,000 unique players. It contains teams they played for, their nationalities, their overall performance scores, and more. First, we load the data and drop any rows with missing values, safely assuming that the most important players will have their stats filled out. Next, we move on to creating a graph object with two types of nodes, one representing players and the other clubs they play for. To link the nodes, we generate tuples that contain the relationship between players, their clubs, and also their overall performance score as the weight of the edges. Since there are so many players, we end up with a graph that is not connected, which means there are multiple subgraphs with no direct link. So we use a function that allows us to extract the biggest subgraph with all the nodes connected. Here we push nodes into specific variables that will eventually help us color code the players and clubs. This will improve the visuals. We move on to the section with functions called the island method. It's a function that iterates through the graph, each time trimming the number of nodes based on the weight. In this case, the weight is the player's performance, which means we end up with several graphs, each containing only players of higher scores. And this is the result. And we went down from 17,000 unique users, unique players, to 13,000 on the biggest connected graph. And we trimmed 5 times to end up with 59 nodes of 45 players and 14 clubs. We're now working with a much smaller data set, so we can start visualizing the relationships. We start with the second to smallest island. And we can see that the best players and the best teams are starting to emerge, but the graph is still too condensed, too overpopulated, so we move on to the smallest island. And we can see the best teams and the best players that are currently dominating the football world. Now with this data, we can dive a little bit deeper into deeper analysis and get additional aggregations around the key performers. First, we extract the results and look them up in the main data set to get all features. We do a little bit of cleanup and we start aggregating. We start with a simple count of high-performing players by their nationality. This may help us predict the World Cup favorites. We mark the 2 finalists, France and Croatia, in orange for an improved visual. Next, we move on to the average age of best players by their nationality. We'll just open up the entire graph. Even though we are focusing on only the best 45 players, so we cannot generalize it as a national trend. But the difference between Sweden and Slovenia is remarkable. because the average duration of playing career is 8 years. And as you can see that the difference between Sweden and Slovenia here is even more than 8 years, which can be extremely significant when in a player's overall career. Next, we move on to the financials of clubs and players. First, we have to convert the data set and the values, the values for the value of feature and wage. They were represented, thousands were represented as Ks, and millions were represented as Ms. So we simply convert this to numeric values. And this is the average wage or average salary in thousands of euros per club. And you can see that Barcelona and Real Madrid are the clubs that pay their top performing players the most. Besides the salaries, each player is valued as an asset for club transfers. PSG has the most valuable players on average, but this is only half of the story. The other half is the total value of all the best players that managed to make it in our list. And we can calculate the total assets in terms of superstar contracts. And you can see that PSG is still fairly high up, but Bayern Munich and Real Madrid take the top positions with Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich has 7 top performing players, and their total value is almost 400 million euro. Next, we move on to players' positions on the field. And there is no surprise that the strikers and the left and right wings are the most or the best paid positions on average. This is where the fame is. This is where the entire action happens, and this is how the matches are won. The last metric we looked into is the overall performance versus potential, and we simply calculated the difference as a new feature called growth. One thing that stands out here is the Slovenian goalkeeper here, and specifically it's his value and his salary. You know, it's clearly it's lower than the value and salary of other players with similar statistics, and this may be a clear indication for a club manager to approach him for a potential contract. And lastly, we summarized it by nationality, and we predicted or we calculated that France has the most players with the most potential improvement. And keep in mind that this data was generated in 2016, and we estimated 11 points of potential growth for France, and they won this year's World Cup. So to conclude, we used a large data set with over 17,000 players. We applied the island technique to find the superstars, and we performed a detailed analysis on their performance and some of the available metadata. And finally, we matched the potential growth, and we matched it to this year's World Cup winners. Thank you.